gentlemen, let's get ready to rumble!
Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Political Smackdown. I'm Andy Debman and I'm your host this week. And we've got the whole crew here this week. Fancy that. Everybody's in full attendance this week. That happens every once in a while and it's really kind of refreshing. Well, we hope you've had a good week this week and we've got a full slate to talk about this week. But before we get started, we need to start on a sad note. We want to just reach out and with prayers and think about the two kids up at Burns High School that were killed in a horrific car crash this week. One of the kids is still in the hospital in critical condition, and we just want to reach out with prayers and think about how horrible this is and how easy it is for somebody to just lose their life over something that is so easily done. And folks, this could happen to any of us at any time. Just take our eyes off the road one time just to be distracted. So whatever you do, please be careful when you're out there behind the wheel of a car. Have your seatbelt on, and for goodness sake, put the cell phone down. We don't know that was part of it, but it is so easy to be distracted. So our prayers go out to these families and hope the other kid has a speedy recovery, but also to the folks that were in the other vehicle that hit it, because you can only imagine, I don't believe that they were harmed, but you can imagine having that weight to carry the rest of your life. It's got to be a horrible thing. Let's go ahead and let's get started with our question. We talked a little bit about last week about this, and it's just hard to believe that 24 years ago, Aisha Degree disappeared here in our county. And in full disclosure, the main thing, these search warrants were issued last week to my cousin Roy Lee Debman, his wife Connie, and their girls, that they searched all their homes, vehicles. They confiscated quite a bit of material from all their homes, and all based on some forensic evidence that was discovered in the book bag when they were found some years ago. And this is something, folks, it's a difficult thing to discuss because this is something that's been hanging over this community for so long. And you think about the Degree family, the things that they've been through all these years, and now you've got the Debman family. This is hanging over them. They've have retained legal counsel to try to have some direction about how to handle this, because so far nobody has been taken to jail, no accusations have been leveled at this point. Just the Sheriff's Department along with the SBI and FBI have been searching to try to get some evidence to see what has happened. So, Mike, why don't you start with this? This isn't a good thing for anybody. And I feel for the Degree family, they've had to live with this all these years, and now it looks like maybe we might have some closure to this at some point.
Well, it is a difficult thing to talk about, and since you have the same family name, and I believe Roy Lee is a second cousin of yours.
He is.
I know it's tough for you, and I don't know any way to mitigate that, Andy. It just is what it is, as the old saying goes.
And it is difficult to talk about. It really is.
And but I've looked at these warrants in some detail. I've got several pages from the affidavits that justified the warrants. And the real simple fact of the matter is that the warrants basically, and the affidavits along with it, basically name Roy Lee Debman and Connie Elliott Debman, who share 3 children in common, Lizzie Grace, Sarah Gwynn, and Anna Lee, all of whom were teenagers at the time in 2000 when this happened. And they do this they say that Roy Lee and Connie are suspects based on, this is directly from the document, various items of evidence have been sent for analysis. 2 of those items returned evidentiary results. Genealogical data narrowed the samples down to 2 individuals. 1 sample belonged to Russell Bradley Underhill. Another sample belonged to an hereditary family member who is a daughter of Roy Lee and Connie, Anna Lee. Anna Lee was only 13 years old. But from what you read in all of this, a hair from Mr. Underhill and a hair of Anna Lee's that genealogically matched, which is a near certainty in today's world, these. Now, the book bag was not found until a year and a half after Aisha disappeared. And it was found wrapped in 2 black garbage bags about 30 miles north of where she disappeared from, off of Highway 18. And I've seen video of when they found it. So that's the connection that is the greatest connection that helped them to get the warrants. And the warrants were issued by 2 local Superior Court judges, Judge Pomeroy and Judge Sally Kirby Turner, after they read all the information they had. Now, there's a lot more to it, but that's at the bottom line. And they believe, and it says in there, that due to the ages of Roy and Connie's 3 daughters in the year 2000, when Aisha disappeared, investigators believe adult assistance from Roy and Connie would have been necessary in the execution and/or concealment. So they had search warrants that searched 601 and 621 Cherryville Highway on 150 there that Roy Lee and Connie owned, her house in Hawthorne, and then a couple of the daughters' houses. And the Underhill guy had been, what's the right word, a resident at the nursing home or assisted living center in Vail. And he died mysteriously in 2004, so he's not around to tell us why his hair may have been there. And we don't know what Anna Lee has or has not told them. Andy, they took a lot of evidence. Of course, there was a green car identified a few years ago that she was seen pulled into, according to a couple of people, Aisha, that is. And then there was an old green car that most of the people probably watched the show have seen in news reports pulled away from 601 Cherryville Highway this week as evidence. And they got a lot of other things they took out of the houses and stuff. And, you know, I'm not going to speculate. That's why I'm just reading simply from the warrants. But at this point in time, until we hear differently, we don't know what evidence they got, Andy, and if it helps solve the case. It seems remote after 24 years that there's more evidence that you would find, but who knows? I'm sure law enforcement knows a lot more than we know. And Andy, I think you and I and all of us here, we all know this is not easy for our law enforcement because this is a well-known Cleveland County family that may have been somehow involved. And they do say for the first time, Andy, and this is an important thing, that they believe that she was the victim of a homicide. And that's in the warrants. And so
that's never been said all these years. That has not been
said in all these years. So I do not know the end result. I'm not going to speculate. We're just going to have to let law enforcement take its course. Of course, Roy Lee has hired David Teddy, premier defense attorney in Cleveland County, and I'm sure that I think I know Mr. Teddy well enough to know he'll tell Mr. Dedman, you just don't need to say anything. You need to send them to me.
Well, if he will listen to him, I think it'd be smart. But, you know, you really have to commend Sheriff Norman and his department. When you stop and think how many law enforcement have come through there since this has started under Dan Crawford's administration so many years ago, and how many detectives have gone through and handled this case over the years. And, you know, and all the press conferences that have been held and updates on this. And, you know, it's just hard to believe that all these years, you just never say never, and nobody's ever give up. And they've kept this case. It's never been considered a cold case. They've kept working on it, and you can't help but commend Sheriff Norman and his group for keeping this going.
It's actually gone through 3 sheriffs. Dan Crawford was sheriff when it happened, and then Raymond Hamrick, and now Allen, and none of them have ever let it die. That, we have to give them credit for that. You know, the Murdoch case in South Carolina made national news. They never actually proved him at the scene nor found the weapon, but they had enough circumstantial evidence that they got a conviction. It would be much better if they could find the remains of Aisha Degree for them, because I know they have dental records, we've been told, and the DNA from her, I guess. But without that, it's also much harder, but not impossible. So we don't know. We don't know what's going to happen at this point.
Well, Betsy, it is a tough one any way you go on this. And people's lives have been just disrupted and basically destroyed through all this. There's no good thing. The Degree family has been absolutely devastated all these years. And now the Dedman family, there's just no way they can get around it, whether they're proven guilty or not. There's always going to be some doubt about this. But it's just horrific any way you go.
And I commend the Charlotte news station that every year on February the 14th, they do a special remembrance of Aisha Degree. And I think that kept it into the forefront. And they had it on national TV. And the mother kept praying that she hoped that she was somewhere alive and that she would return to them. And of course, that's what a parent would say. 24 years. And now to maybe come to a conclusion, but a conclusion that, well, it will be closure. It will not be easy, whatever they find. And I do commend all 3 sheriffs for trying their best to find what happened. And who knows, maybe DNA sampling has improved in 24 years and the equipment that they use. But my heart goes out to the family, but I do hope they have closure. And to the Dedman family, now that it's all over the news, the names are out there and the children and so forth, and yet you want to find what really happened. And that green car that they say, I had heard she was pulled into, somebody said, or she just got into, if that green car that they removed from the property had a dented headlight or something hit. So it makes you wonder, maybe was she hit and maybe removed? Or I never thought about homicide. I never thought about homicide.
Well, you don't like to think about that.
No,
kind of
you
stuff.
don't for a
You really
9.
don't.
And yet, why did she leave her house? That will probably never be answered.
Well, and you can't help but wonder, Wes, what started the whole thing, and why would a child get out in what was on the middle of the night and was pouring the rain, and a February night like that, and there's just so many questions that are still unanswered. But when you get right down to it, a child looks like was murdered in all of this. And that, for the first time in 24 years, we've got law enforcement saying that's what appears to have happened. And it's just, I don't know, this is just so sad, it makes you want to just lay your head down and weep.
It really does. And, this has been on our minds in Cleveland County for 24 years. I will agree with what has been said about the sheriff. The one thing that's not been said, I think we need to state, he's got to follow the leads wherever they go, and he's doing so. So kudos to the sheriff for continuing to keep this on the forefront and following the leads where they go. I think by the same note, we've got to recognize that folks are innocent until they're proven guilty. I do hope this brings some amount of closure to the Degree family. I can't imagine what they've been through for the last 24 years. I just don't know that there's a whole lot that can be said about this. I'll close with, it's so important that we Mike, as you stated, don't speculate. We allow this to play out, find out what happened, let the sheriff and the detectives and the SBI and the FBI get to the truth, answer what questions can be answered, and then we'll know. But the speculation, the rumors, all that does is damage the families, all families involved, and that's not what we need to be doing right now.
Well, and we're all parents, and I can't imagine having to go through this like the Degree family has done. That is just, it's just horrible to think what they've gone
It's
through.
hard enough to see folks lose a child due to disease or a car wreck.
Right.
Because you're not supposed to bury your children.
That's right.
But for a family not to know for 24 and a half years, and then now they believe they have enough evidence to say she was the victim of a homicide.
And that's what is so bad. But I think, Wes, you've hit the nail right on the head. It doesn't matter who you are or what your status is in a community. The law is the law. And the sheriff and all law enforcement has to follow the leads no matter where it goes. And everybody deserves their day in court. And where if you're guilty, you're guilty. If you're innocent, you're innocent. You have a jury of your peers and are adjudicated as such. Well, folks, we're going to take a break, and we'll be right back with the second half of Political Smackdown.
Hi, I'm Deb Harden, host of For Your Information. The goal of our show is to educate and entertain you about all things pets throughout Cleveland County. We have various guests joining me each month to talk about dogs, cats, pigs, whatever kind of pet you can think of. Also each month, we will be joined by some furry friends looking for their forever homes. For your information, each month, right here on C19 TV and online at www.c19.tv.
I was looking at my
And we are back with the second half of Political Smackdown. All right, let's move on to something a little bit more lighthearted. We've got late breaking news that came out of Raleigh this week. It seems that Republican Mark Robinson got kicked out of his office in the General Assembly by Senate Pro Tem Phil Berger. And now he has got pressure being applied to him by all sides, and especially it seems like it's coming out of President Donald Trump's group. And it seems like he's been looking at some adult websites, Wes. Can you imagine that? It seems that he has said that he is some kind of a black Nazi. Can you imagine he's something like that? And all other things, he said that he also believes that we ought to go back to slavery. He even said that he even thinks he would even buy a few. Can you imagine that? Wonder how many he thinks he ought to have.
If we had slavery and I could afford one, I wouldn't buy a dead one. They won't work.
Folks, that came out of Mike Philbeck. Send all cards and questions to him about that.
You may as well laugh as to cry.
Ain't that the truth? Take it from there, Wes. Just wherever you want to start from.
Well, Andy, thank you for the question. I'll try to answer it completely and honestly because it deserves a complete and honest answer.
My question or what Mike
Your
said?
question. I was raised a middle-class kid, and we had a nice lawn. Have you not watched the news on Kamala? That's her answer for everything. I figured I could use that. I guess that flopped.
Yeah, it really did.
Plunk.
Come on.
On this, I agree with Representative Richard Hudson, who said yesterday, I think, that Robinson says the allegations are not true. I think he needs to assure the people of the state with a little bit more detail they aren't true. If it is true, it's absolutely disturbing. The reality, Robinson was down significantly before this and unlikely to win. The bottom line, I think, is how is this going to impact the down ticket races, Andy? What's this going to do to the rest of the Council of State? This is going to be potentially very damaging to all the Republican candidates. It's unfortunate. I'm concerned with the way we choose our candidates quite often. If you remember, Robinson became lieutenant governor because of one speech he gave that went viral on YouTube. And I don't know that that necessarily qualifies.
A Greensboro City Councilor.
Yes.
At the same time, he deserves the opportunity to disprove or explain or whatever. And I think we need to be careful rushing to judgment quite yet. Allow this to play out, but it certainly doesn't look good, and were it not for a lot of his previous comments that are on the record that are very clear, I think he'd have an easier time denying these.
Isn't it kind of bad, though, that the Trump people are wanting him to get out of the race?
Well, they had a rally the other day, and he was not there officially because he had COVID. I don't know that that was the case.
He may have something, but I don't know. Betsy, I know you're chomping at the bit on this one, so
Well,
jump on it.
You know, after the primary,
Don't use a Kamala Harris quote, because it won't work.
listen, if I do, it will be a positive one. But, you know, I could not believe that he won the primary over Dale Falwell, and who was, or even Bill Graham, much better candidates. Of course, you've got to remember that it all goes along with the Trump ideal, you know, where you say all these outrageous things and you do all this stuff. And, well, I mean, you got him. He's on your ticket. He's your gubernatorial candidate. And it's too late to remove his name from the ballot. He's not welcome at the Trump rallies, I was told. He's supposed, you know, Trump's coming to Wilmington, I think, tomorrow, and he was not invited. Now the North Carolina Executive Committee of the Republican Party could select a replacement candidate if he steps aside.
Not now. Deadline was last night.
And they said that any vote for Robinson would go towards that replacement candidate. Now, I've never heard that.
Yeah, but he had to do it by
He had to do it by
11:59 last night.
By last
And he
night,
didn't.
so he didn't, and he said he wasn't. And I do agree that even though he said outrageous things before, he should have a chance to defend himself, with proof. When I was watching the CNN things that the proof, they have it pretty well documented that this
There's
him.
no defense.
I mean, and the things he says is just outrageous. But you don't want to get down to being the governor of your state and have someone like him who to be there. So please vote for Josh Stein.
Well, Mike, I've never heard of a website called Nude Africa, of all things. And that's the website.
Well, if you hadn't heard of it, none of the rest of us have.
Well, I can honestly say until I read the CNN article this morning, I had never heard of that
Did
one.
you look it up yet?
No, sir, I have not. I can honestly, hand to God, I have not even looked at it.
Well, on a serious note, if we're down to me,
we are.
At this point, Robinson needs to do one of two things. He says he did a minute and 13-second blurb on his Facebook page as it was coming out and said these are untrue, and he didn't say these things in the CNN article. Ted Budd, our newest senator, said after the article appeared yesterday, Robinson needs to prove what he says to the voters. So that's one thing. He either needs to figure out how it was done by AI and a CNN hit piece, or if that and what he was accused of in an Assembly article a couple weeks ago, if any of those things are true, then he has to have a mea culpa. He has to say, I did some of these things, probably not all, because you know how they get exaggerated. I've asked my wife, I've asked my family, I've asked my God to forgive me, and all I can do is say, that was me in a different era. I mean, this goes back now 12 years to the end of it,
Right.
so it's over 12 years old. And so he needs to either confess it, ask for forgiveness, and say, let's talk about issues and move on, or he needs to be able to show that it's not true in some fashion. Clearly, Morgan Jackson is one of the brilliant minds in the Democratic Party, and I'll guarantee you he's behind all this opposition research.
Well, Morgan is a fine
And
mind.
he does do it. I didn't say he was a fine man. I said he's
a
smart.
fine mind, I said.
okay,
yes,
mind, okay.
yes.
Morgan's a good guy. I know
Yes,
him.
he's-
I
But now
know him well.
let's not forget some of the issues at stake here.
Well, I mean, he hadn't talked about issues since
I
he
mean-
filed, so
Well, I'm
what
gonna-
should he do now?
Well, but this is related to the subject.
Okay.
Josh Stein has repeatedly, as Attorney General, refused to enforce state laws in North Carolina. He wouldn't even enforce the 20-week abortion restriction before it was changed to 12. He agreed with Cooper that it was okay if a baby was born alive, that it could be allowed to die. He refused to defend the law that prevents convicted felons from voting as Attorney General. He did everything he could to undermine the voter ID laws that the General Assembly passed. And when he was in the Senate, he voted against charter schools every time he got a chance. He voted against voter ID every time he got a chance. And on I could go. I mean, he is a far left Democrat. The only other thing I would say is even if somebody can't vote for Robinson, depending on how this turns out, they should not blame the other GOP statewide candidates, whether for the judiciary or for all those council of state seats like treasurer, auditor, and so on. Even though some of them will have early on supported Robinson, let's see what they say. You're going to see Morgan Jackson's people put together things like showing Dan Bishop saying he supported him, and then showing what CNN said, and showing this and showing that. But that was before they knew this, so let's give them credit, and they all need to come out and say that. But we ought to vote for who we believe is the best and not let it
position.
impact every other ticket.
I
everybody
really
on the
don't
ticket.
think it would have that much effect. I really don't. I mean,
I don't think it will up ballot, but I think it could down
It will
ballot.
down.
There's only one up ballot, and that's the
I'm
president.
not that sure of that really. Anyway, well, let's go to the lightning round. Betsy, what you got for us this week?
Well, I'm going to the House of Representatives. They failed to pass a bill to avoid the government shutdown again that comes the end of this month. That's next week. The bill was 6 months funding extension that was tied to a contentious voting bill that that would require showing citizenship to vote. And it went down 220 to 202, and I think they should have left it at just shutting down the government, and it would have passed. Already, non-citizens cannot vote, and it just would make it harder to vote if everybody had to show proof of citizenship. I think that it was sort of just a ploy to get it on the books, that it failed, and now they'll come back, and surely they'll come up with some idea not to shut down the government by the end of next week, although Trump is hoping they will. So I'm looking at the House of Representatives next week.
Wes?
Well, I will change mine. There are many municipalities and areas where non-citizens are allowed to vote. That is a fact. And I'll leave it with, this is the 349th day that Americans are still held hostage by Hamas. I'm anxious for Israel to be allowed to deal with their problem.
Mike?
Well, for my lightning round, I'm going to switch it. I was going to do one on sports, but I forgot to do this when we were talking about Mark Robinson. In my considered opinion, Betsy, Andy, and other Democrats should go straight to Hallmark, buy a thank you card, and send it to Mark Robinson.
Well, to be honest, Mike, I've already done that.
Arlene, yes.
My mama told me to be well-mannered and thank people for giving the best gift we could have had.
That's right.
Well,
Mike.
folks, that's all we got this week. Hope you've learned a little something, and we'll be back again next week with a new edition of Political Smackdown.